Quiet on Set, The Dark Side of Kids TV is a docu-series that is an expose on all the horrible things that happen behind the scenes of popular Nickelodeon shows from the 90s, the 2000s, and even some of the early 2010s. The docu-series focuses on Dan Schneider and him as a boss. The docu-series starts out chronicling Dan Schneider in his rise to fame through creating Nickelodeon shows, but also highlighting his horrible behavior towards the kids, the adults, and the underlying content that he puts within his shows. But then the show shifts to literal pedophiles that are hired for these companies and how they preyed on children. Now, this show was released last week over the course of 2 days, and I remember seeing the trailer for this, and I'm like, hey, I'm a 90s baby, and I'm a fan of Nickelodeon, and I have been made aware of some of this stuff, particularly with Dan Schneider, so of course I had to watch. But then once the show aired and released all 4 episodes, this show has been quickly catching like wildfire. Everybody's been talking about it, from the people involved with the documentary to people that were involved in these shows, and even Dan Schneider himself made a response to this docuseries and was interviewed by someone that worked on one of his shows, which that in itself is a little gross to me. But when it's all said and done, I consider my childhood officially ruined, or at least some of my childhood officially ruined after watching this documentary, because of course I'm a 90s baby. Nickelodeon was a staple within my childhood. Shows like All That, The Amanda Show, Drake and Josh were all shows that I watched as I was growing up. But after hearing what was going on behind the scenes, I'm like I am flabbergasted. I'm flabbergasted and heartbroken that this happened to them. It happened at the expense of making funny television. It happened because parents wanted to make a buck off of these kids. And it happened at the expense of these kids' mental health and well-being. Now, like I said, this documentary is 4 episodes, so I'm just gonna quick rapid fire through each episode and I'll tell you my thoughts and feelings. And woo! But episode 1, it basically chronicles Dan Schneider and his rise to fame and how he got to work with Nickelodeon, his partnership with them. But it also highlights his horrible behavior, from verbally abusing his co-workers and making the kids do things on these shows that as a kid you think nothing of it, but then once you see with adult eyes and see it through a certain context, you're like, yo, how did this fly? Like, everybody's been talking about that one scene from Ariana Grande where she played Cat on Victorious, and she's laying upside down on the bed and she's holding a potato that resembles and she's pouring water or whatever the fuck down her chest, and that's something that could resemble something out of porn. And even on Zoe 101, they spurted something on Jamie Lynn Spears' face, and that could be resembled to something that is seen in porn. But it's just, when you look at that through that lens, you're like, hey, yo, who co-signed this shit? But 2 of the writers from some of these shows, they highlight Dan Schneider's behavior, his sexual harassment. He makes some of them give massages to him. Some of the physical and disturbing things he made the kids do on these shows is a little questionable. And the fact that they made the parents wait somewhere else while these literal strangers take these kids onto the set, that wasn't alarming enough to the parents. And then episode 2, it chronicles Dan Schneider's relationship with Amanda Bynes and how that possibly was a factor into Amanda Bynes' well-being, as we all know now. He basically groomed her and tried to catapult her career. But we also get testimonies from former All That stars like Leon Fryer, forgive me if I butcher your name, Katrina Johnson, Giovanni Samuels, Kyle Sullivan. But Brian Hearn, he was the one in particular that covered himself in peanut butter and had a dog come in and lick it off of him. And his mom, she was prominent on set and she was objecting to a lot of the stuff that was happening on set. And then they eventually fired him, but they wasn't trying to fire him. They fired him just to get rid of his mother because she was becoming a problem on set. And they even warned him, like, hey, you keep doing this, you're going to ruin some opportunities for him. And it's just like, yeah, but at what cost? His mother knew what was going on. But then this docuseries goes to a much, much darker place, because I remember episode 2, it started out with one of the co-stars of All That. She was a child at a point, and then there was someone they hired on set called Jason Handy. He was one of the production assistants, and he got real acquainted with some of the parents, and everybody felt comfortable around him, almost to a point where Brandy's mom, she felt comfortable with a grown man sending emails to her child. And then eventually he emailed a picture of himself whacking off to his daughter, and then Brandy, she got scared and showed her mother, and the mother really didn't do nothing about it. Now granted, I can also understand where she was coming from. She didn't know what she was doing, because you don't know if they was going to get her for allowing her daughter to exchange emails with this dude. So I get it, but at the same time, come on now. The moment grown man sending emails to your young daughter, isn't alarming enough to you and you okay that. But of course, Jason Handy, he got caught by the police and he even admitted to the police, yeah, I am a full-fledged pedophile. Yeah, that dude needs to be locked. Well, I think he is, but yeah, that dude just not need to be in society anymore. And then there's Brian Peck, who is also a pedophile that everyone was made aware of, and then eventually one day he just stopped because he sexually assaulted one of the kids on one of these Nickelodeon shows. Who is that? It would eventually be revealed by Drake Bell. And real quick, let me just say real quick, because Brian Peck, he invited all the kids and their parents to his house for a party. He even showed them pen pal letters that he was showing off to John Wayne Gacy, who y'all know is the clown killer from the 70s. And I'm like, and you would think, okay, a guy that is a pen pal for one of the most notorious killers in history, that wasn't a red flag. But anyways, Drake Bell, he reveals his truth that he was sexually assaulted by Brian Peck. And I even remember Brian Peck, he played Pickle Boy in one of these shows. I forgot what it was. But once I figured out who that was, I'm like, yo, not Pickle Boy. But Brian Peck, he sexually assaulted Drake Bell for years and years and years. And he even drove a wedge between Drake Bell and his dad because his dad saw what was going on. But then Brian Peck, he basically manipulated Drake Bell into, well, before all the sexual stuff started happening, but he basically drew a wedge between the two of them to the point where his mother stepped in and she became his manager. And his dad, he would just requested one thing and one thing only. He held no grudges to the fact that he wasn't handling Drake Bell no more. All he asked was just one thing. Do not leave Brian Peck alone with our son. And what did she do? She let him do it anyway. But anyways, Drake Bell, he's hanging out with his girlfriend at the time. And Brian Peck, he somehow find his girlfriend's number and he's calling numerous times. And the girlfriend's mother, she sees what was going on. And hey, shout out to his girlfriend's mother at the time. She was the guardian angel Drake Bell needed at that time. So she asked Drake Bell to go to therapy. And then once he found out that Brian Peck was about to play the dad on Drake and Josh, that was the last straw for him. He told his mother. Brian Peck, he gets arrested, convicted. But this is the most heartbreaking and disturbing part for me because on the day of Brian Peck's trial, not only did he only get 16 months in jail, he should be in jail for life. He should not be allowed to walk among society. But the most disturbing part is that there was more people in support of Brian Peck than Drake Bell. And I'm with Drake Bell when he said, how dare you? How fucking dare you? You all should be ashamed of yourself. They even revealed some of the letters that were given to the judge to be a little bit more lenient on Brian Peck. Now, I'm not going to say who some of these names are, but you probably already know who they are. But once you see who some of these names are, I just refuse to believe that these people really signed off on the child molester. And it could only be one of three things. Either A, someone offered them a lot of money that they just could not refuse. B, someone has dirt on them that they just don't want getting out to the public. Or C, they were manipulated by misinformation. But all those people that were in support of Brian Peck, how fucking dare you? Now I know some of those people, they have the full context and they wish that they could take back them letters they wrote. But all the rest of you, no. How fucking dare you? But episode 3, for the most part, centered on Drake Bell. But then episode 4, it continued more on Dan Schneider. And real quick, this is a negative towards the documentary in itself because they did try to frame it around Dan Schneider and make it seem like he was the worst person, but in reality, it was Jason Handy and Brian Peck, and then there was a third child molester that they hired, but then luckily Nickelodeon, they caught that shit real quick. But the fact that this all happened in that quick a time span, that they hired 3 child molesters, that is disturbing enough. And Nickelodeon, shout out to y'all doing better now. And one of the things about Brian Peck is that after he got out of jail and served his time, he was hired to work for Disney Channel on Zack and Cody. And luckily, granted, one detail that people are forgetting to mention is that Disney, they did find out that shit real quick and he got the door. But still, the fact that Disney, like, who's doing these background checks? But because of all this trauma that Drake had endured, it sent him down a dark path. And granted, he's all together now. And Dan Schneider, he would eventually get the boot for his behavior as a boss. And in his defense, I will say that, again, Dan Schneider, he is not the worst person. His behavior on these sets is unacceptable, but what he did was just inappropriate, but it's not illegal. But still, he should not be allowed to be on sets no more, especially kids' sets. And from that interview, I will say it is good that he's acknowledging his behavior. And I think he even said it's just one of those things where maybe he was put in a position that he just wasn't mature enough for. And at least he's taking accountability. Now, all the victims, now it's up to them whether or not to forgive them, and they have no right to forgive them. But that's just how I assess the situation. And even after Nickelodeon parted ways with Dan Schneider, it still doesn't change the fact that a lot of these victims, they're still traumatized by their experiences on working on these shows. And they even address that in these episodes. And there's even a cast member called Raquel Lee. She was a cast member on all that, and she endured some racism on the show. And she plays the voice of the head girl sister on the Proud Family. And I remember her on this one Disney Channel movie, The Proof Point. But one thing that stood out for me from her is that, like, people ask her, like, would you ever consider getting your kids into this business? And she straight up said that there is almost no thought before my no. But overall, my final thoughts on this docuseries, I mean, like I said, my childhood is ruined, and it's probably going to take a lot of mental healing for me to ever watch any of these shows, especially since a whole bunch of them are on Netflix now. But Dan Schneider is a pedophile piece of shit that should not be on sets no more. But like I said, he was not the worst person. He's still a piece of shit, but he was not the worst person. It was these child predators on these shows. And the parents that allowed this to happen and knew what was going on, but still allowed it to happen for the sake of complacency, you all should be held accountable. Brian Peck, Jason Handy, and whoever that third person is that they hired and quickly fired, the three of y'all, I hope you burn in hell. And the real MVPs are Brian Hurt's mother and Drake Bell's father. And speaking of Drake Bell's father, like, he is the example of why it is important for kids to have their fathers. But my heart goes out to all the victims, both kids and adults, but especially the kids, and particularly Drake Bell. I hope you all get the therapy and healing that you need. My heart goes out to you all. And as for the documentary itself, I'm not going to rank this documentary based on the content because that's just a whole other thing. But as far as the package of this docuseries in itself, not the best documentary I've seen, but again, I feel like this docuseries gets by because of the content that is being presented to us, and yeah, it definitely did its job. I almost feel bad for rating this docuseries because of the content. I really don't want to rate this, but I'm not rating this based on the content. I'm rating this based on the package in itself. So I'm going to give Quiet on Set, The Dark Side of Kids TV, the hard eyes emoji.